Welcome, everyone, once again to the official MUFON Podcast. I am your host, Richard Beckwith. My guest tonight is Dr. Simeon Hein. Dr. Hein is a PhD sociologist who studies how humans interact with technology. In 1996, he started his own research and teaching company, the Mount Baldy Institute, to give people the opportunity to learn resonant or remote viewing, a type of intuitive training that taps into a natural, human, creative, unconscious intelligence. He travels extensively to study crop circles and takes people on crop circle tours. He is especially interested in UFOs and the study of unexplained phenomenon. He has also written a number of books, such as Opening Minds, A Journey of Extraordinary Encounters, Crop Circles and Resonance, and more recently, Planetary Intelligence, 101 Easy Steps to Energy, Well-Being, and Natural Insight. His most recent book is Black Swan Ghosts. A sociologist encounters witnesses to unexplained aerial craft, their occupants, and other elements of the multiverse. Dr. Hein was recently featured on the History Channel show In Search of Season 2, Episode 7, hosted by Zach Quinto, about the topic of UFOs and crop circles. I had the honor of meeting Dr. Hein at a small, by-invitation-only conference for a private organization called IHCI, the Institute for Human Cosmic Interaction. Dr. Hein did a lecture on a concept I found fascinating: many interacting worlds. In the many worlds interpretation, every quantum event gives rise to a new universe which branches into a near infinite number of new universes every time a quantum measurement is made. All possibilities are therefore realized. In some universes, the Egyptians may still be the dominant civilization on Earth. In others, humanity may never have arisen or evolved. All of these universes are equally real, exist continuously through time, and possess precisely defined properties. I have been fortunate enough to get to know Dr. Hein since we first met, and I am very excited to have him here now. Dr. Simeon Hein, welcome to the program.
Hey, Richard. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's really, really good to see you. Where are you at right now?
I'm in the Northwest of the United States.
In the Northwest.
Doing some remote research out here, yeah.
Yeah. I noticed when we communicated that you called me from the Mount Baldy Institute.
Right.
Can you tell us about the Mount Baldy Institute?
Yeah. Well, thanks. Well, first of all, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Richard, the Mount Baldy Institute is something that I set up about 20 years ago to study all these so-called anomalous phenomena. We didn't have the word UAP back then, but, we had the idea of remote viewing. There were things called UFOs and Bigfoot and balls of light and crop circles. And I thought, man, these topics are just begging for some scientific investigation. I just got my PhD. I said, let's just dump the academic thing and go with these topics, because I'm never going to get anywhere in a university studying these cool topics. I'm just going to set up my own institute. And I set it up in 1997, right after I had learned remote viewing at the Farsight Institute in Atlanta with Courtney Brown. And I said, I just got to keep doing this, on my own, with my own folks. And it got bigger and bigger every year. There's more data and more topics. And as now listen, Richard, you are near and dear to my heart, because you called me the other day and said, Simeon, let's talk about the many interacting worlds theory. I was music to my ears. Richard, I've been lecturing about this topic, and I'm not getting very much back from people saying, I don't know. And you said, I love that. I read about this. There are physicists out there doing this, but I want to bring it into our field. Yeah. The idea that they're parallel realities, and we interact with them. And there's models out there from legit regular physicists say this is the simplest way to look at reality. They're not looking at our topic. They're looking at physics. Yeah. And you called and you said, let's talk about it. So, I love it. So that is where it's going. Mount Baldy Institute. Yeah. So thank you, Richard, for
let me tell you something
after
first.
All these years.
Let me tell you that one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about multiple, or I guess many interacting worlds, was because of the lecture that I saw you do at the small conference that we attended together. The small, I guess, the private by invitation only conference that we attended for that group called IHCI, the Institute for Human Cosmic Interaction. And I had a lecture prepared. I've always got a lecture in my pocket if I need to do one. But I had one called The Big Picture, where I talked about multiple universes and things like that. And then and of course I was not slated to talk, but then I sat and listened to your presentation. And when you started talking about many or multiple interacting worlds, I was just fascinated because it kind of paralleled but went far beyond what I wanted to talk about. So let's talk about that. Simi, tell us about multiple interacting worlds. What are multiple interacting worlds?
Oh, it's a great question. Great question, Richard. And it was so much fun meeting you at that conference. We had a blast. You told me stories that are still resonating in my mind, but we'll get to those another time, So this all started many interacting worlds. Before the many interacting worlds, there was many worlds interpretation. A graduate student at Princeton University in 1957 who had heard Einstein lecture at the Advanced Institute there in Princeton in the 50s, where Einstein was located, and a lot of other great physicists. And Einstein said, I got a problem with quantum mechanics. It doesn't quite add up. I don't feel it's complete. There's an issue that measurement sort of affects the experiment, but it's not really fleshed out. And there's no way to look beneath the surface what's going on. It's just like a black box. And Einstein wasn't happy with it for very good reasons. Very seriously. Einstein was a realist. He believed that science should describe reality the way you and I perceive it. And it should match what we see in reality. And quantum mechanics, since the 20s and so forth, had said, we don't know what's going on there. The math works, but we don't know why. It's probabilistic. And furthermore, it isn't the way it looks on the surface. What you see on the surface at macro scale reality is not what's going on underneath. In fact, we don't know what's going on underneath. In fact, there is no quantum reality underneath. It's just a measurement tool. There's no theory, so stop asking any questions about why it works. Einstein wasn't happy with that. And I got to come down on Einstein's side. We can talk about what model describes it, but what it ended up doing was setting off Hugh Everett III at Princeton to create an alternative model to Copenhagen. Copenhagen told us that once you make a measurement, and you probably heard this, and many listeners have heard this, at a microscopic scale, you're collapsing some sort of Schrodinger wave function, and all the probabilities of where the particle could be disappear, and there's only one possibility left, what you're observing at the moment. Where do all the other particle probabilities go after you've made a measurement or made an observation? They said they just disappear. They're gone. Don't ask where. It's called don't ask, don't tell. It disappears. It's called the disappearing worlds model. Some people joke about it. And a lot of physicists have had a problem with that because it's not satisfying. And Hugh Everett was one of these people who said, that doesn't make any sense. It's not kind of scientifically consistent. It's more like philosophy, metaphysics. Hugh Everett believed that quantum mechanics should stand on its own and be consistent with our interpretation of reality, and not say that it's just a math system and we still need classical mechanics, that there's this, I'll tell you, Richard, in a nutshell what it was. Copenhagen said there are two worlds, this quantum world and a classical world. And don't ask what's going on in the quantum world. It's just math. It's classical. It's complementarity. And a lot of people weren't satisfied with this complementarity. It's sort of like there's two sides of a coin, but they're never on the same side at the same time. And so Hugh Everett invented the many worlds interpretation, as it's now called. He didn't call it back then. He called it relativistic state. He said, what if the quantum wave doesn't collapse, right? And in fact, you and I are quantum objects too. Hugh Everett asked a very good question, which rattled physicists to the bone. He said, why should there be wave collapse? Aren't you a quantum object to? Do you see yourself collapsing? Do you see anything collapsing? Why is it only microscopic? Hugh Everett was almost like a quantum wave purist. He said that everything is quantum. If it's quantum at the atomic level, there's no reason it shouldn't be quantum at our level of reality. And if it's going to be mathematically consistent, that would mean that every nanosecond, worlds are splitting off with all the possibilities that the Schrodinger wave equation would describe. Particles being here, there, and everywhere, everything with different versions of itself. And the reason it looks consistent to you and me is because we're quantum objects too, constantly splitting, as he put it, into other versions, one of which sees one outcome, one sees the other, and that's the many worlds interpretation. And back then it was called relativistic states. They didn't quite call it that. Now, Hugh Everett was not well accepted. His thesis advisor, John Wheeler, was a friend of Niels Bohr. And he was afraid that this is going to get him sort of some bad juju from the Copenhagen folks over in Denmark. And so he was very reticent to back Hugh. And he backed off from it. He said, he told Hugh he'd have to make, modifications to this idea and change the word. And there are letters now that show that he wrote to Niels Bohr. He said, Hugh Everett, he's had some misunderstandings. We can work on this. He'll come to Copenhagen and visit you, and we can all flesh this out. John Wheeler wanted to make it work out. He was into
he was trying to reconcile the community.
Yeah, he was trying to, and it didn't work. Hugh Everett went over there. Niels Bohr, he had met Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum mechanics in Princeton when Niels came over for a while. But he went over there, and Niels Bohr just said, this is a joke. There's no multiple worlds. There's no splitting. What I'm doing works. Just don't try to go beyond it. Just leave it alone. It works. And Hugh didn't accept that. He created his dissertation, and then he got sick of academics. He left. He went to work for the Pentagon, modeling thermonuclear weapon explosions. And he ended up keeping us out of a thermonuclear war because he showed it would be so devastating. There were no winners. So we can thank Hugh Everett. He never went back to academics. He participated in one or two conferences in the 70s for his fans. This sort of came back. People started researching this. What is this? It came up in Star Trek. Those writers had looked at this. And you remember some of those Star Trek episodes where they're parallel. This started to come into science fiction, and it stayed there for a while. Now, to fast forward to your question, what is many interacting worlds? I don't want to blow anyone's mind here, but it's actually saying that if we can let go of quantum wave collapse, maybe we can let go of the quantum wave. And that, in fact, what we call quantum mechanics is the result of parallel realities, billions of them interacting, creating wave-like patterns. Sort of makes sense. If you throw rocks into a pond, you get these troughs and you get waves, interacting waves.
And you get interference patterns. Exactly. And we, reality, are the result of those interference patterns, right?
Exactly, Richard. You win the prize here. That's what many interacting worlds model from Howard Weissman and other at Griffith University in Australia. These guys have done enough mathematical modeling to show you don't even need a quantum wave. It reappears as from the interference pattern, but it's not the cause of everything. It's the result of parallel realities interacting. So I don't want to, just keep talking about this too much, but that's what many interacting worlds is. It starts with Hugh Everett, and it adds in David Bohm with this kind of pilot wave idea, but a multidimensional pilot wave. So that there's so many parallel realities interacting. You're part of one. We're obviously part of the same one at the moment, or we wouldn't be doing this. Right. But there's other versions that we can't see because it's at a slightly different frequency. It just doesn't quite show up. But it influences us, and we influence those.
And you're likely not the Dr. Simeon Hein that I met at the IHCI conference.
Right. We all evolve. We all change. And there's interactions.
Yeah.
And that creates... I'll leave it at this. We can talk more if you have questions. Parallel realities interacting in a very tightly controlled way creates quantum mechanics. it works mathematically. Now, we can't say, Richard, that this is right and Copenhagen is wrong. But what we can say, it's on equal standing with this, which meant that Hugh Everett was on the right track. And just to point out to show how close he was on the right track, there's a new book by Sean Carroll, who's a very physicist from Caltech, called Something Deeply Hidden. And it's an entire defense of Hugh Everett's point of view from just a quantum mechanics point of view, saying that point of view is the simplest. He doesn't get into many interacting worlds, but it sort of doesn't matter. It's just that physicists are starting to say, is there a simpler way to look at it that's more, consistent with what we perceive in the world? And here's the best thing about it. And then you can ask some questions.
Sure.
The many interacting worlds people say in their interviews that we can no longer rule out our interactions with other worlds. Some of them may be very similar to ours. Some of them may be very different. They say, we don't know what that looks like, but we're just saying that's what the math leads to. Now, bring in all of our favorite topics here, put the two together.
Right. So when we talk about multiple interacting worlds, many interacting worlds, what we're also talking about is perhaps the basis for, poltergeists, ghosts, maybe even some aspect of the UFO phenomenon. I know that, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit later, but I know that there has been discussion amongst the folks that have been involved in the recovery of UFOs that some of them say that some of the visitors to our world are not necessarily from our universe. Have you heard that before?
Oh yeah,
they're from parallel universes.
This is where this leads. If you pursue this line of thought, what I just described to you, from beginning of quantum mechanics to many interacting worlds model as a possibility, it leads to exactly what you're saying. All of these phenomena, including ghosts and poltergeists, and things that seem to come out of nowhere and go back to nowhere. Bigfoot, right? Mm-hmm. Many UFO sightings, UFO occupants seem disappear. It seems to suggest that there are other realities next to us. And this MIW model explains that and says it's consistent. And so when people who've worked on crash retrievals, you've spoke to them. I've spoke to them in our own ways. And it suggests it's not necessarily literally extraterrestrial. It's literally from another universe that's in our own space, but it's not directly accessible to us most of the time because, hey, we're just at this one frequency, and I'm using it as an analogy. There's other frequencies next to us, like on a radio band. You've been in radio. I used to build radio kits. There's other frequencies there. Just because you're not perceiving them right now doesn't mean they're not there.
Well, let me toss this out, Simeon. Let me toss this out there. So is it possible that when we were, or as we developed nuclear weapons, and we, some of powers on the planet continue to test nuclear weapons, that the activation of these nuclear weapons may have an effect on adjacent universes?
Precisely.
And that may be why they are interested in us, and they are not necessarily coming from, or some of them may not necessarily be coming from another planet in a distant part of the galaxy or the universe, but may just simply be right next door on a different frequency of vibration.
Exactly. This is what a lot of people think, and who research this, and UFO researchers, and it's where it leads, is thermonuclear explosions don't just affect our reality. Because of the massive amounts of energy released at a quantum level, it's going to affect those other parallel realities. The inhabitants of those worlds might become concerned. They might feel it's not permissible. They may say, we knew about these guys on this other frequency, this other parallel reality, but it was okay until they started affecting us. We're not going to permit it. Hence, you get the Northern Tier events. You get many, many cases, more than the public knows, of UFOs coming, deactivating nuclear weapon systems at bases across the United States. across Russia, the Ukraine. In some cases there, they activated them and started the missiles counting down, though I'm told that that happened at some of our bases too. I can't remember at the moment. Maybe you remember which one that was, where they started counting down. It's probably happened in any country that's had nuclear weapons. They've probably had this experience, even though they haven't talked about it. Anyway, you can kind of see where this is going. This is sort of logically consistent all of a sudden, right?
Right. They, again, may be from somewhere else other than just, a planet some distance away.
Right.
And that leads me to my next, subject I'd like to talk to you about. And I think it's linked with many interacting worlds and somewhat with quantum entanglement. And that is, you are something that we call remote viewing, but you're calling it resonant viewing. And I'm assuming, and tell me if I'm wrong, that has something to do with the concept that you talked about during your discussion of the multiple interacting world, which was this idea of resonance. And that is the source of the ability to perceive things some distance away. So can you explain that to us? Can you explain what resonance is and how that, I guess, serves as the basis for what we call remote viewing?
Right. I mean, at the basis of quantum mechanics is frequency, wavelength, and energy, Planck's constant. And when you look at the quantum formulas, they're based on resonance, the idea that everything has a fundamental frequency that's quantized. It's not continuous the way you turn a dial on a radio. It has discrete, quantized, it's in packets. And everything has a certain frequency, which goes down to these discrete packets at what Max Planck found. It's now called the Planck.
Hence the term quanta, right?
Exactly. That's where quantum comes from. And if everything has a frequency, then everything that exists, has a kind of a unique identifier to it. And when you are sort of at the resonance of some object, person, or place event, and the reason I call it resonant viewing instead of remote is you're sitting here writing, describing, this is the written technique that was developed for DIA, CIA by Ingo Swann and others at SRI. Right. The information starts flowing to you. It's faint. It's not like literally seeing it, but it's there. You start getting little signals, and it's teaching you to, write everything down and separate the noise from the signal. Ingo Swann called it the matrix. And he got that idea from a number of sources, but also David Bohm, who we mentioned a few moments ago, the quantum physicist who was friends with Einstein, wrote at the time one of the classic books that was a textbook in quantum physics. And he had a realist model that said that particles and waves are sort of the same thing at the same time, and that there was this implicate order formed from every particle interacting with every other particle. And Ingo liked that idea. It suggested interconnectivity. He called it the matrix, and that remote viewers connect to this matrix. But it's not like they're going out there to get the information. The matrix is all around us. It's the idea of Bohm's implicate order. Everything's interconnected. This is an idea, by the way, that physicists are talking about now. Mm-hmm. Again. And
so you're tuning into that frequency. You're somehow
tuning into
utilizing consciousness, obviously, some aspect of your consciousness.
Mental radio, if you will, as a metaphor, mental radio. That's what Upton Sinclair called his book, by the way. It's not literally an electromagnetic signal. We're not saying that, but it's a quantum signal, and your unconscious can identify it and describe it, which means that information, everything is available to you, including parallel realities, extraterrestrial worlds. Events in our past and our future are already in this matrix somewhere because it's so vast and near infinite, if not infinite. So that's the idea of resonant viewing, and that's how it sort of connects in. And if everything is interconnected, Richard, wouldn't it make sense that once you get involved with something like remote viewing, resonant viewing, you're going to get involved with these other topics because things are connected in that way. They're not separate, discrete topics. This comes up again in ufology so much. Are they solid? Are they, amorphous? What about, Kathleen Marden has talked about this so much, the psychic experiences of witnesses, right?
Right. Well, and Dr. Greer talks about it too. Dr. Stephen Greer talks about this quite a bit, where he essentially feels as though these beings, just like we're talking about, some of them anyway, come from this alternate parallel reality,
Right.
and they're
Right.
visiting us from there, and they're not just they are partially physical, but they are also have the ability to, I guess, phase in and out of our reality in some way.
Right. And we should say for folks, this does not rule out the idea of literally extraterrestrials.
Oh no, no.
We're not going the Jacques Vallée route here completely. I mean, I love Jacques Vallée's work. I've talked with him. He's added so much to our field. But I'm not ruling out the idea of extraterrestrials. There are new exoplanets discovered every week. Billions, and how many in our own solar system, how many suns? What is it now? 2 trillion? Something like that. It's ridiculous. And so many planets. So I'm not ruling out extraterrestrials. I'm just saying there's another path to get to these visitors that does not involve them getting here from far away, though I'm sure they can do that too.
Yeah.
It's some of these visitors could be neighbors in a parallel Earth that develop differently than ours with different timelines, or even ourselves from the future. I know some ufologists want it to just be nuts and bolts, because some of those craft definitely are. You've talked to the crash retrieval witnesses. I have. I know they've handled real stuff.
Right.
That's there, but stuff that comes through from there would seem also very solid once it had physicalized in our reality. Once it had matched our resonance, it's going to seem as solid as anything else around us. That doesn't mean those folks didn't figure out how to move around between dimensions like this.
Right.
Now, Richard, I just want to say we need to consider this as a possibility. I'm not saying this, I know for certain this is what's going on.
Sure.
I'm just saying the science doesn't rule it out anymore. That's a big step, because how many times have you and I and other people been criticized by the mainstream scientific community that says there's no theory here? Well, we've got a theory now. It's called MIW.
Right.
So they can't use that argument anymore.
Right. No, I completely agree with that. I think, especially after the length of time that I and some of my colleagues have been, and you have been involved in the study, at least of UFOs, that over that period of time, your viewpoint on the subject sort of develops into this idea that you're not just talking about nuts and bolts craft, which I'm certain there are, because we have pieces of them, but also that they're coming from many different places, and they are, as I discussed with Lee Spiegel last week, with on many different levels of technology. One of the things I didn't mention, obviously, was that they may be, of course, from parallel universes, or from the future. They may not even be the kinds of living things that we're familiar with.
Right.
But we have to keep our minds open to that. Just because, I mean,
Right.
I was thinking about this the other day. We really have kind of got this complex that, well, we know a lot about science, so therefore we know everything. We're really smart folks, and
Right.
humans know everything, but we just don't. We're
Right.
no more enlightened than we were, in my mind, relatively speaking, 1,000 years ago.
Exactly.
Our technology's gotten a little bit better, but what do we really know about the nature of existence and so forth? I mean, considering civilizations that could have been around for millions of years, I mean, we're just at the beginning of our sociological and cultural evolution.
Oh, yeah. No, Richard, no doubt about it. When I talk to mainstream physicists, and they say to me, what is it that we haven't explained yet? There's nothing. And I say, well, dark matter, dark energy, that's 95% of the universe, still unidentified. Well, that's out there. I'm saying, what here do we see on the planet that hasn't been explained sufficiently? We don't need anything beyond quantum mechanics as it stands. And if you're content with shut up and calculate, some people call it, don't ask questions. I mean, if you've narrowed your viewpoint down to a field that's this big and that's all you're looking at, and say, don't ask me anything, it's like the drunk and the light post. Don't look beyond the light post for your key. Yeah, then it works. But what about all these phenomena?
You forgot the part where he dropped his keys somewhere else, but he was just looking under the lamp because the light was better.
In quantum mechanics, even Sean Carroll says that quantum mechanics, I forgot the harsh words he used for it, but it's like abominable. It's just outrageous in its inability to want to be introspective and look at the fundamental questions of how the universe works and how that fits with our ideas. So I think what you're saying is true. Rather than present science the way I see it presented in Science magazine, this is the way it usually be. Someone will investigate a new kind of corner of the universe, a new little part of the topic. And I love Science magazine. Listen, I have it stacked. My phone here is stacked on science. I love reading that magazine. You always learn something new, but it's always like there's kind of questions that are safe and questions that go far afield. And if you want to be quote unquote, successful in your career, you're going to ask safe questions. That's
Sure.
what I used to be told when I was there. But what about the big questions? What academics have done is they've chosen not to look at the tough questions, only look at the questions that enhance their career. And you're going to ignore 95% of the universe. So I'm pretty much convinced, just like you said, rather than present it like how much we know, why don't we stop telling people when they have these experiences? Why don't we stop debunking people's experiences? I believe people like you do and all the MUFON investigators, when they tell me, for the most part, they've experienced something and they seem like credible people, no reason
Sure.
to make it up, I'm going to believe them. And you and I know there's thousands and thousands of people out there who haven't told their stories yet.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know them.
Maybe millions.
I know them. Millions. This is a hidden event, like Ron Westrom, the sociologist, calls it. He likens it to like child abuse or something, when that was not considered to be real until the 60s, when there was this meeting in Washington of all these professionals, and they said, well, what is breaking these kids' bones? It's not falling out of trees. It's not bullies. It's their parents. And that was huge. And then you had people come forward, right? It's like any one of these social movements. There comes a point where the witnesses get to come forward. And so that's the answer to these quantum physicists who say to me, what hasn't been explained yet? Yeah, it's all these witnesses' experiences of hauntings and poltergeists and all the people we've talked to over the years, the UFO witnesses, the
Yeah.
people who've encountered extraterrestrial beings, whatever they are, other sorts of humanoids, but not human, but humanoids. That's where the evidence is. And so I would celebrate anyone, just like you said, Richard, who says, finally, we don't know what's going on. It's fine. It's healthy. You don't have to know everything.
Isn't the first
Jesus.
step toward understanding realizing that you don't understand?
Yes, it's a very healthy. And the scientists in the past, before modern times, it was called natural philosophy. It wasn't called science. It's sort of a newer term for it. But they would admit that there was so much we don't know. Now, they would leave the rest to God, which isn't something that most of us would just say, well, God would understand it, and we're mortals down here. Maybe we shouldn't understand it. The people that did push it, like Giordano Bruno and others, were burnt at the stake or put under house arrest, like Galileo, or like Copernicus. Copernicus didn't even publish his work until he had died. He was so afraid of the repercussions. So we're making a lot of progress, Richard. At least we're having this conversation, and neither of us at this moment is afraid that we're going to be arrested in the middle of this conversation for asking the tough questions.
I'm not even afraid that I'll be made fun of anymore.
You are not afraid. We don't care. So we're making
Right.
progress, Richard, and it's healthy to say, and I'm willing to say it every day I get up. Look at COVID. Nobody knows why there's so much variability. As I was saying to you on the phone the other day, between super spreaders, some people can spread it to 5,000 people like one woman did in South Korea, and other people don't spread it to anyone. Nobody knows why that is. It's healthy. The more we can embrace uncertainty, the more we're going to learn. Don't we want to know how this really works, or do we want to stay in this little story that we were taught in kindergarten?
Well, that leads me to the next
story.
thing. One of the things that's happened since you and I were together at the IHCI conference in Reno was the whole thing with AATIP and the Tic Tac videos and all that stuff. And so I'm interested to get your take on that, because clearly this is a development that's taken place over the last 3 years. I think it was the end of December of 2017, which I think was the same year we had our conference. The end of that year, they released these videos, and now the whole world's changed. All of a sudden, there's an admission that UFOs exist. There's even an admission that there are materials that have been collected from these objects, and even seems somewhat of a tacit admission that these objects are not from our world.
Right.
And so
yes.
That's all happened since we had our conference. So I'm interested to hear your take on that. What is going on?
No, you got to hand it to these guys. Whether you agreed with them or not from the beginning, they have made a huge impact. They've risked a lot personally.
I agree.
Every time I see these guys, Lou or Chris or any of these, on the show Unidentified, it's gotten better as it's gone along.
Yeah. Every time I see Lou I've seen Lou Elizondo two or three times, and had a chance to interact with him as a result of being on the MUFON board. And I have to tell you, I just think the world of that guy. I mean, he's in my mind, a true American hero. Not just because of the thing with UFOs, but I mean, he's a true patriot, a true warrior. I would be behind that guy all the way in a war.
He is. I know I have friends who might criticize me for agreeing with you on that, but this guy is doing what Americans are supposed to do.
Yep.
Tell the truth and risk your career to tell the truth for the benefit of the whole society, right? This guy's done that.
Yep.
And I completely respect what he's done against, it's obvious, a lot of adversity. I mean, to quit over this just so that you could finally tell the truth. And Chris Mellon also. I mean, these guys are really coming out and they're saying, I don't care about the ridicule, folks. It's real. It's affecting us. We need to find out more. Congress needs to get in the ball. The federal government needs to take some action. I mean, that is really gutsy, and you have to respect that, whether you agree with their ends or not. Now, they've used some terminology, but even that's changed. You know, when I talked to Hal at the SSE IRVA meeting, Hal Puthoff, he said this actually. It wasn't just our private conversation. He said this to everyone in his presentation about the UFO materials and the blue shift and all this. He said, the threat is not from the extraterrestrials. Listen to his presentation. It's from our lack of knowledge. And other countries, our adversaries, may get there. We may have a Sputnik moment where they develop this technology sooner than we do. He said that's the threat in AATIP. He said he needs to explain to everyone, it's not, we don't have any idea that this is a credible threat yet. As Chris Mellon said the other day, it's usually us chasing them, not them chasing us in these vehicles. Now, I'm open to the possibility that some of it does seem to have been hostile at times. Listen, I just need to see the evidence. We're all open to evidence. But just looking at 100 years of history, it doesn't seem to me that you could say so far that it is a threat. Though, I mean, if the data pointed to that, listen, we go in that direction. But still, TTSA has brought this in front of the American people, and they won't quit. You got to respect them for that.
Well, I completely respect him for that, and I really appreciate Lou Elizondo. I have to tell you, I just really like Lou personally. I think he's a great guy, and I feel kind of like I'm older than he is, but I almost feel kind of like I got a little brother thing going with it. I just, I don't know. When I get around guys like that, I just
no, I got to say something about Lou. He's evolved over a couple of years from the initial TSA press event to now. He's totally changed in a positive way, I think, to saying we don't totally know what it is and we want everyone to be involved. At the beginning, he would say this is not just for idle curiosity. We need to have real reasons to study and so forth. He's dropped all that and included the rest of us. Just on Twitter today, he was thanking everyone for being involved. Everyone who's researched this, because as we're sitting here today, this movie is going to come out tomorrow, the Jamie Foxx movie, The Phenomena, which I haven't seen. Just seen the trailer, and we're told it's very important and very good, one of the best, if not the best, UFO documentary. And Lou was just saying how important that movie is, that they're saying things in there that he couldn't say because of his security clearance, that Jamie Foxx has gotten access to. And that's totally changed the tone for me. He's included us, and I feel that the whole thing is evolving in a very good, positive, and important direction to bring everyone in. Lou is the one who's been saying over and over again, we need to have a national discussion on this topic. Mm-hmm. Now, how many of us don't have had that feeling for decades? And finally, we're having someone with his level of credibility, right? Yeah. So it's good. It's all good.
After all of that stuff happened, we saw Lou at the 2018 MUFON symposium where he spoke. We met with him. The board met with him then and prior to that a couple of times. And I was always impressed with his level of professionalism and his patriotism and his love for his country. I was thoroughly impressed with that. And as I said, I'd follow him into battle anytime, anywhere. Follow him into battle because
Well,
he's much tougher than I would ever be.
Well, I'll tell you something, Richard. My dad landed at D-Day on Omaha Beach in the 1st Infantry. And he told me what it was like to see the boats that were coming in, bringing troops in, get hit by Nazi mortars, people dying. It was no joke. So my own dad was, part of World War II. And I can say, being his son, all the rest of us, he risked his life for the truth and for American ideals. We should never let that go. Those are real. They're real to me every day because my dad risked his life for them. And we should all expect the best from all the institutions around us.
We should all be really thankful for folks like Lou Elizondo, that's for sure.
Yes, people who risk their lives to preserve our freedoms, and we don't hear from them very often. And Lou came forward. He told us a bit about his background. Every day those people go out in the battlefield, they're risking their lives for the rest of us. We may not always agree with the battles they're involved in. It's true. I mean, I've known Vietnam vets. It certainly can be complex, but we need to respect these people. And when they come forward and tell us, people who've taken those risks, risk their lives, that this is an important issue, that we need to investigate this, I think we should all listen to them.
I completely agree with that. A lot of really interesting things happening in our world right now, and they all seem to be converging. Doesn't time seem to be moving a lot quicker than it ever has? I mean, maybe it's just me.
No, it's moving, Richard, it's moving. Just look how much progress we've made in a couple of years. This topic has gone from something where it was just you and me and people at the conferences, and we'd share our stories. And, we talked to that where you were there. There was that waitress there that we talked to, who said she had those experiences. It was with some other people at the conference, but it was that stage where you would just talk and someone say, I had that experience, to now there's a forum for it. There's the show Unidentified, which I hope keeps going, and shows like that, where all of a sudden, Leslie Kean said something that I found shocking a couple of days ago in her interview with Jeffrey Mishlove, which everyone should see, in his show New Thinking Aloud.
Yes.
He's interviewed all sorts of people and physicists and philosophers, and he had Leslie Kean on about UFOs. She said that Congress has been briefed about this topic and UFO crashes for a long time. A long time. She didn't say just in the past year. She said repeated briefings, classified briefings. So our congressional representatives are getting briefed on it. Wouldn't you imagine they want to sort of talk to us, people like you and me that have been involved with this for a while? I mean, they're just getting pulled in at the tail end. So yeah, I mean, it's progressing.
Yeah. Well, you would hope that they would tell us eventually, but as well as I do that the idea is that they can't really tell us because people would panic. And I asked Lee Spiegel about this, and so I'm going to ask you the same thing. Do you think that that's why they're not telling us, because they're worried that we might panic, or is it? And I'm going to take this a little bit further. Is it, as Dr. Greer posits, that they just simply don't want to let us know that they have the technology because they want to be able to keep it secret, keep it to themselves? And we're not talking about governments. We're talking about private companies that get a hold of this technology, and once they get it, it never sees the light of day. So is that what's happening?
Right. Well, something's very fishy here. I mean, there has to be an organization in place that is distributing these crash materials to scientists to, see if they can figure it out. As some have said, every 10 years or so, they bring these parts out of the basement and hope the science has evolved enough. But there has to be some organization. There was speculation on Twitter today from some researchers that the DOD has created a shell company that they farm these parts, and the shell company then gives it to the aerospace company, and it creates this plausible deniability. So that's one level of why we may not be hearing about it.
Well, that's exactly what happens. Simi, that's exactly what happens. I do a lecture on government secrecy, and what you're talking about there is the authority that's been given to various members of the intelligence community to be able to start these private businesses. They have the and they have the authority to just basically go out and create these shell companies. They have that authority if it furthers the national security of the United States. So they can go out, they can form shell company after shell company. They can make money doing all kinds of things that doesn't have anything to do with government, and then take the profit that they make from that and do the kind of work that they're in it for. You see what I'm getting at?
Oh, yeah. Listen, this is critical. And Steve Gurr may be right. This might be illegal at some level that we haven't discovered yet. I mean, you're an attorney. You would know if this is illegal or not. Maybe DOD has found a way to make it legal, but there are drawbacks here. The drawbacks are the stovepiping. This is exactly what Hal Puthoff talked about at IRVA SSE in Vegas. He related this to me in private conversation and on the stage. I'm not revealing anything that wasn't publicly said, but we hashed it out. And the danger is that when you have all these stovepipe special access programs, they're not talking to each other. Right. And they can't find the experts within their own program to figure things out. So it kills scientific knowledge. Hal even told this to me. He said, it's bad for science. That's what he said.
Of course it is.
It's bad for science because without open discussion, as TSAS is calling for, we won't advance as a society. We don't just need these private shell companies to figure out some technology so they can fit it on the next version of the next fighter aircraft to come out or on some satellite. We need to evolve as a society. I'll think of all the kids out there that were inspired by Star Trek. I was one of them.
Right.
We have to, and Lou said this a couple days ago on Twitter. He said that there's a danger from secrecy, that the knowledge doesn't get out and the knowledge doesn't go where it needs to go. He realizes this too. So there's a drawback to secrecy. I think even Eisenhower made reference to this. There's big drawbacks. So we live in a system that only sees the benefits of the secrecy, perhaps because it's privatized.
And I completely agree with that, and I like your use of the term stovepipe. I like your use of the word stovepipe, because that's really what's happening. You sort of try to develop this technology in isolation. You're not able to talk to others in your field, share knowledge, and so forth.
Right.
But let's be serious about this though too. We're also talking about national security, and so you can, in my mind, I can see why, if you're in charge of national security and the safety of your country, you don't want this technology getting out to other people. It would be better if everybody on the planet suddenly developed it simultaneously. That would be great. But, what would happen, as you stated earlier, if one of our enemies was able to develop this technology earlier? So I can see the push and the pull there, why you'd want to keep it secret, but at the same time, by keeping it secret, you are not able to develop the technology, and you just end up in this thing where you take it out every 10 years, and you could have figured out a long time ago if you talked to everybody about it.
Exactly. It's a paradox, isn't it? I mean, there's two ends of the spectrum. I'm sensitive to that level of national security that you're talking about in terms of the applications of this and so forth. But national security is more than just our defense establishment and weapons delivery systems. It's the entire country. The national security has to do with the infrastructure of the whole country. And if we're holding back scientific development that could be benefiting our roads and our electrical grids. I mean, my mom was without power for a week from one of the hurricanes just a couple of weeks ago, right?
Right.
If we're not developing our fundamental infrastructure because of this, that's a no-no. It's got to stop, because, I mean, even Eisenhower had the National Defense Highway Act, the National Defense Education Act, and other ones, because he recognized that defense is the strength of the entire system, not just the military architecture. We need to be sensitive to that, too. And I feel it's gone too far in the direction of dumbing down the whole society. You and I are having a great discussion right now, but this discussion should be echoed 100 times across the country in different formats.
Yeah,
and just be.
I think it is. I think it is, Simeon. I think that these things are being talked about now when they weren't really necessarily being talked about before. But that's why I think shows like this are important, because it's important to open up the discussion about all of these things and bring them out into the light of day. It is time for, in my mind, for humanity to awaken. And so we can continue to sort of live in this dream, this nightmare that we've created for ourselves, Or we could do, and gosh, I have to say I'm starting to sound a lot like Stephen Greer all of a sudden, which is fine. But there's a world of abundance and with clean air and clean water. There's a world out there that we could all be sharing together with plenty of food for everybody if we could just tap into those sources of energy,
of course,
that we're not allowed to. If that technology that's being kept from us would be released, and we could in fact start talking about these things. I think about Tesla's electricity being freely transmitted through the air. That would make all sorts of things possible. Flying cars, you wouldn't need to you wouldn't have to have a vehicle with batteries in it. You just get in a really light electric vehicle and go flying off because the electricity it runs on is just being transmitted.
Absolutely. And all of the children out there who have this imagination, they got those neurons and their neuronal connections that are inspired by talking about these subjects, right?
Right.
It's going to get them excited about life and the careers they choose and the things they do. We need it for the sake of the soul of our society, because this cover-up has been going on far too long.
Yeah.
We all know this. It's been going on from Roswell. It's been since then, or maybe I've talked to those Roswell witnesses and the people whose dads flew the material back to Wright Pat. It's been going on way too long. Everyone knows this. And it's a soul-sucking experience. We shouldn't be enduring it. We shouldn't be putting up with this anymore. We can have national security and be talking about this topic at the same time. And that's the goal for our congressional leaders right now, Richard, is to figure this puzzle out. How do we let enough of this information out so it benefits public discussion? It's built into the Constitution that the public has access to information to make decisions about national matters. That's how our system works. They can't do that if the information is withheld.
Right.
And that's what TSA is telling us. That's what Hal Puthoff told us. These are the people that would know. These are the people that have seen all the stuff and have the security clearances. There's a point where secrecy goes too far, and it destroys countries, like it destroyed the Soviet Union. It could destroy China. That type of secrecy impedes progress. We all know this. This is why we live in a democratic republic. We don't like those systems. We don't like those dictatorships from above. We don't like one-party systems. Secrecy in the end is destructive. You do need a certain amount for military security, no doubt about it, but it can go too far.
Yeah.
And I'm not the one there's a balancing point. We got to have it balanced.
Yeah, I agree. As you're talking about that, I keep thinking about the movie 1984, Richard Burton's last film. And there was a scene where Winston Smith and Richard Burton are in room 101, and Winston Smith says, "Well, what about the spirit of man?" and then Richard Burton says something to the effect that, "If you want to see the future of man, Winston, picture a boot on a human face." Something like that. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing from the film, but you see what I'm getting at. I mean, that is the future if we don't wrest it from those who wear the boots. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I do know that people from your state, Wyoming, are never going to put up with that.
Oh, yeah, no. We don't like boots on our face here.
No. Some of your sheriffs have said they won't even allow federal officers into their counties without permission. I mean, you're freedom-loving people in Wyoming. We all are. And that is not the future that we're going to have here in the United States. It's not one I'm going to put up with. We need to have, that 1984 commercial that Apple, where they're throwing the javelin at the screen of all this, the IBM image, we don't put up with that. We're innovators here. We got to keep innovating, but to keep innovating, we need ideas. And Richard, there's so many witnesses that could be coming forward if they had permission to speak, if they weren't afraid. I know them. You know them. They've seen a lot of stuff. And just having conversations with them, I so wish people could be privy to the conversations that I've had with these witnesses that you've had. Yes. Because you start wondering, what is this universe we live in? What is going on here? And that's healthy. I think we need that. Here's why we need this, Richard. We need the sense of wonder. We just need that sense of wonder. It's healing, just to have that sense of deep curiosity every day. Yeah. You wake up, that's the universe we really live in. We don't need to dull that down anymore. These beings are showing up all over the place. right here, there, to the federal government. You've heard the stories, how they've showed up to people at high levels in the federal government. We haven't heard those stories, but you've heard them, and I've heard them from credible sources. Everyone has been presented with this phenomena. Everybody. It's time we have a national dialogue about it, for just to get the conversation going. The technology will evolve. Sure, some parts of it need to be kept classified. I'm not against that. Classification is important. Again, my dad, I remember seeing the letters he wrote back home on that rice paper. The censor had censored out the locations he wrote into his family. You had to do that. You couldn't give away locations where the troops were in England and their training. I get it, but you still need to have the conversation. That's what TTSA is telling us. And let's let the conversation begin. Let our representatives come forward. They've had the briefings. You could Richard, even 1% is a lot more than disinformation saying it's ice crystals and flocks of plover and mistaken planets and all the other BS explanations that we've heard for 70 years, right?
Oh, I
all the typical Project Blue Book explanations that they even knew weren't true. We just don't need to lie to each other about this. Let's just bring it as far as we can bring it, and even a little bit would be a lot. It's a very concentrated juice we're talking about here. Yeah. Now, going back to your question a few minutes ago, would people flip out? I don't think so anymore. I just don't think it's going to happen. It's been in the Times. It's around. But you and I are around increasingly younger people.
Right.
The population ages. Younger people come along. When I talk to these younger people, they're fascinated.
Yes.
They want to talk more. They're not. So I don't think we're going to get the panic. I think people are going to feel relieved.
Yeah. In James Fox's film, I think it was I Know What I Saw, or maybe it was Out of the Blue, and he was going around and talking to people in France after Japan and CNES came out and basically said that. And I think this was as the result of that that study that they did. What was that called? That Japan did.
Comida.
Comida report, the Committee for In-Depth Studies, and they were asking people after that study came out, where the result of the study was that the best explanation for the UFO phenomenon was the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And this is their government that came out with this, and they were going around asking people about that. How'd you feel about that? And nobody was freaking out, because their government had basically just admitted that it's likely if these objects are, at least some of them are linked to people coming here from somewhere else, and people just really didn't seem to care about that. And I think that's really the case. That it's like I think they've already been open enough to it that they won't freak out.
I think so. At the citizen hearing, we had a lot of representatives from the militaries of Latin America, and I remember, I believe it was one of the military officers from Uruguay or these other countries, Chile, and they said, we go into the schools and tell school children. We showed them the pictures from the gun camera footage from the planes. We said, look, these are the OVNI, the UFOs. Don't be afraid of them. Not sure what they're doing here, but we don't think it's very destructive. We don't know, but we're not afraid of it. Yeah. And they show school kids. And in Japan, just last week, there was this newscast. They said that they're going to start reporting UFOs. There was a meeting between our DOD and the Japan self-defense. So they had I've taught in Japan. I taught RV in Japan 5 different times. And there was people who wanted to take me to this UFO museum there, which I was told started out as a real UFO museum, and under pressure of the U.S. government just became a hypothetical museum. But at one point they had some materials there. This is what I was told. I didn't get to visit it.
Right.
So I think.
Well, this reminds me of the magic shop you went to, and which is a topic for a completely different conversation. But
man.
When you told me about that, when you reminded me that you had taught in Japan, you reminded me of that story, and we'll have to tell me that one of these days, unless you want to tell it now.
Yeah. Well, just briefly, there was a guy there that one of my students said, you got to go see this, and he could do real PK. I was told Sony filmed it with their best cameras at 10,000 frames a second, could not detect any strings, any wires, any tricks. They couldn't explain it, but I saw him direct a cigarette from across the room into my shirt pocket that he was levitating on his hand. I thought that was weird enough. There's got to be a wire, and then it's in my shirt pocket like a little torpedo coming across, making a right angle turn in front of my eyes and going into my shirt pocket. There are people that can do PK. And I should say this, Richard, I've talked to people from the Defense Department that know it's real because they were monitoring Soviet experiments in the 70s.
Yeah,
I'm allowed to say
and they were doing that, and I have to tell you that
they were doing
that I also know someone and have personally that has this ability, and I have personally witnessed someone performing psychokinesis. I have no explanation for it. I'm absolutely certain that it was not sleight of hand. And I don't know how to explain it. I know I'm going to, folks are going to listen to this. And I have this little disclaimer at the beginning of my program that says all of the opinions expressed during this program are those of the host and his guests only, and do not necessarily reflect those of MUFON. And especially when it comes to something like psychokinesis, you want to definitely say that, look, this is just something I saw myself. I'm not out here speaking on behalf of MUFON, Richard, saying there's psychokinesis.
I can tell you, from the Department of Defense, someone who served high level in the Air Force there. He told me he was in a room when they monitored a Soviet experiment in the 70s in real time. Mm-hmm. And this guy, a PK sender 1,000 miles from Moscow, bent forks and things back. They heard the astounded expressions of the Russians they were monitoring at the time. And he said, there's no doubt it's real.
Yeah.
There's no doubt it's real.
Yeah. Well, having seen it with my own eyes, and I approached the person who did it, and I said, so and so, you can do this at will under laboratory conditions. You need to go and prove that you can do this. And he immediately said, no, I don't want to end up like Uri Geller.
Oh no, Uri. I don't know what he means by that exactly.
Yuri's doing okay.
Uri did everything he could to show this to the public, to demonstrate, to get the public involved with his demonstrations over the radio, where people said their forks bent in their kitchens, just listening to him, stuff like this. Uri has done so much to help this. I mean, he's a perfect example. The first SRI test subject was Uri, not Ingo Swann. It was
right. Right. And you know what Uri Geller is doing right now? Do you know what he's doing right now?
Not exactly. You tell me. What is he doing?
We have a mutual friend. Yuri Geller and I have a mutual friend. Yeah. Actually, this guy is actually pretty close to Yuri, and Yuri Geller right now, to my understanding, makes a living divining precious metals.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
That's fascinating. There are people that can do that. I know from personal experience in dowsing. There are dowsers that can literally find water. They can really do it. I've had neighbors tell me they've dug their wells that way with dowsers. Even after a professional water company that they paid a lot of money to couldn't find anything, and the dowser comes in, finds it in 10 minutes. It's real. Yeah. There are people that can do this, and we should be exploring. We shouldn't be ridiculing this. Why are we ridiculing subjects? I know not everybody can do this the way those people can, but it's a real phenomena, and people can do it to some degree. I've been at those spoon bending parties at IRVA. We were talking about that. Yeah. The IRVA meetings. I've seen the spoons bend. I've even led some of the spoon bending sessions. For some reason, they chose me to lead them. It's real. It's all real. It's in John Alexander's book, Reality Denied. It's a book everyone should read because he has so many. That book. I love that book because it covers so many topics in a nutshell of John's personal experience.
Yeah.
Including the John Hutchinson effect and all these other things. Listen, I want to say, Richard, all these are going to be shown. I'm just going to go out on a limb. They're all going to be shown, my personal opinion, to be real in the long run. It's going to be like when we laugh at the people that believed in witchcraft, we're going to laugh at the people that didn't believe in these phenomena in the same way we can't understand how people could believe in witchcraft and think that science was, it's going to be like that someday. Science has become its own worst enemy in some ways.
Yeah,
it just has. Let's be honest. We could talk about why that happened, but we need to stop stovepiping. We need to take the next step. Those of us in the United States, we don't want to have another Sputnik moment where another country leapfrogs us. I mean, we expect to be the leader of the free world. We expect to have the most advanced technology.
Well, and I as an American citizen expect us to be the first.
We do. I'm not being a chauvinist. I love other countries. I've visited so many other countries. But look, we expect to be number one.
Yep.
And we should be. And we're not going to allow these silly fears and prejudices to hold back our exploration of these topics. It's not weird. As Ingo Swann told me, this is not weird. It's normal.
Right.
It's the prejudice against these topics that's subnormal. That's what Ingo said to me when I visited him shortly, unfortunately, before he passed on in 2013 in his apartment in New York. He said, it's not weird. And he was just looked at me, it's normal. This is the new normal.
Wow. Simi, I have to tell you, I'm really happy that you joined me here tonight. And I'm going to have you back on the show again because I love talking to you. You have such a great knowledge base, and you're interested in all the very same things that I am interested in. And you've just, your talk on many interacting worlds at the IHCI conference just fascinated me. And we've had an opportunity to spend a little bit of time together since then. And I just want you to know that I really appreciate being able to get to know you, and I really appreciate you coming on the official MUFON podcast tonight. I really, really do.
Well, likewise, Richard. Of course, I enjoy our conversations through the times we've talked. I look forward to many more conversations.
Good.
And
good.
with
We'll
everyone out there,
again.
all our listeners, all our guests, everyone who's watching, to have interactions. This is how we learn as we share.
Yeah.
Share information. So thank you too.
Sure. And I want to go ahead and take a minute here to tell everybody about your website, SimeonHein.com. And also the Mount Baldy Institute. If you go to Simeon's website, you can learn about Resonant Viewing. Simeon also
we have
has
little free
done some
mini classes there.
What's that?
We have free mini classes about RV. I have a little 7-part mini class where we just go through all the steps of CRV, in kind of a little step down scale, just to show you what it feels like. We actually even do a little real session in there, recorded.
Cool.
Yeah. So. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. You can do that. There's about crop circles, all sorts of topics.
Cool.
So.
Well, Simi, I really appreciate you being here, and we'll have you back on again, and I'll be back in just a minute with some afterthoughts.
There are cases that are not explainable in conventional terms.
That have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
When we got right up to it, it lit up.
Was this a warning? Was this an attempt to communicate?
Felt scared. I was running and playing, and then I saw this maroon color in the sky.
It was not anything from this earth.
He was looking at all of us. Maybe they're trying to communicate.
They were reaching out to us.
There is an immense array of unanswered questions and an urgent need to get to the bottom of it.
The public has a right to know.
My gosh, look at this thing.
The question is no longer if they are here, but why.
What are they doing? What do they want from us? What are their motivations?
For over 75 years, there have been sightings in the sky.
The UFO shut down several missile silos in Montana.
Thousands of witnesses worldwide.
It had to be a data collection. I'm sure they scanned the warhead.
Just kind of hovering there. It never changed its longitudinal axis. And then it goes poof, and it takes off the side.
And high-level cover-ups.
The government was covering up what happened at Roswell.
Hiding these dark secrets. I was told there wasn't anything there when I knew there was.
People need to know there is something else out there.
Yes, there had been visitation, crashed craft, material recovered.
Shouldn't we be spending some money to study all these phenomena?
I knew this was breaking news for the front page of the New York Times.
They were trying to communicate, trying to tell us something.
Now it's time to tell people about it.
These things are real. They're here. This is happening now.
You are listening to the official podcast of the Mutual UFO Network.
In addition to his website, SimeonHein.com, you can go to Dr. Hein's YouTube channel and watch his videos on resonant viewing, UFOs, and a variety of topics. I hope I get a chance to have him back. On another note, I had the opportunity to see the phenomenon, and I was thoroughly impressed. Spoiler alert, we have pieces of constructed objects that contain unearthly isotopic ratios and unidentified elements. I want to send out my congratulations to James Fox, Lee Spiegel, and the other contributors to the film. James Fox knocked it out of the park. There is simply no longer a question whether UFOs exist or even whether they come from somewhere else. That is now firmly established by science. Right now, the big question really is, who is piloting these otherworldly craft and what do they want? Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time on the official MUFON Podcast.